Tiny dog walks into lion's cage, then the lion smells her. When the small sausage dog entered the cage, the lion stopped dead in its tracks, perplexed at the sight before it. Onlookers could just watch in anticipation as the interaction took place. The people watching didn't know what to expect. The great lion looked at the dog with curiosity and gave it a sniff. What happened next took everyone by surprise. John Reinke brought a small cub to a big cat sanctuary, but he never thought that one day it would mean that he'd be put in a tough situation with all eyes on his now grown-up cub. John raised the cub from when he was small. He named him Bonediger. He said, "He won't hurt me because I've been with him from day one. You do have to keep your guard up. You've always got to remember that they are natural stalkers." GW Interactive Zoological Park in Wynwood, Oklahoma, is the place that John decided to take the cub when his local vet told him that Bonediger wouldn't make it in his natural habitat. It was the intimidation he felt when he saw the dog in the cage that led to the inspiration behind his name. John could feel his stomach twisting into a knot that day. Shortly after he was born, Bonediger was diagnosed with metabolic bone disease by veterinarians. This meant that his bones would be much weaker than a normal lion's bones and that they would grow abnormally. So Bonediger would never be able to live in his natural habitat since he'd most likely die. John loved him and had to be protective at all times. John was the manager at the zoo and he had to deal with more than a few complications. The zoo kept getting more popular as people came to see their main attraction, the Tiger King. The man performed many stunts for the audiences, but soon more than just the normal guests would come around to see the spectacle. John had to try his best to keep them back. The park had hundreds of tourists flood into the park. They weren't even concerned about the big cats there. They were more curious about the park manager himself. These so-called tourists were actually extreme animal rights activists that came to hope that John would give them an excuse to cause a ruckus. And it so happened that something did happen that day. John was also in charge of looking after 4 small Dachshunds. These tiny dogs were able to go about the park freely. Generally, they just see what scraps they could get from guests at the park. One of the 4 was Abby, John's favorite. John laughingly said, "The wiener dog actually thinks she's a lion, and the lion thinks he's a wiener dog, but despite the joke, one of the animals is much more dangerous than the other." John had appeared on Tiger King, an extremely successful Netflix show. John had a special bond with Bonediger and he had gotten into a false sense of security, thinking that he would never hurt anyone just because they had bonded with him. That's a risk you take working around 180 cats. You never know when it's your time. "But if I died, I would die doing something I loved," John recalls. He's already had a narrow escape from death before, and he lost a lot from the ordeal. In 1994, John had a horrific bungee jumping experience when he ended up falling 55 feet without a harness. He was told by doctors that he wouldn't ever walk. But he didn't want to let a small diagnosis get the better of him. After months of physiotherapy and the focus and drive to walk again, he was eventually able to walk. After multiple infections, he had no choice but to go through surgery and have to rely on prosthesis. John was still as adventurous as ever. He got back to work as soon as he could, even without being able to walk like he perfectly again. Despite loving all the animals he cared for, Bonediger had a special place in John's heart due to their shared disability. But Bonediger was growing more and more anxious and unhappy due to being separated from the other animals. So when an oblivious little creature found itself in his den, he seized his chance. Bonediger grew up with another big cat, Tony. The tiger cub had entered the sanctuary at the same time as Bonediger, so they essentially grew up together. But as it became apparent that the animals were getting too boisterous with each other, putting Bonediger at risk from injury, John was forced to keep him in his own enclosure. And there he stayed until an uninvited guest found itself thrown into the ring. To express his discontent about being locked up on his own, Bonediger would pace the length of the enclosure listlessly and bite at the fence. John started to get worried. He knew it was the best thing for Bonediger's own safety, but at the same time, he couldn't bear to watch him acting out due to his intense loneliness. He felt as though he were being just like the doctors who'd tried to tell him his own limitations in 1994. So John was determined to come up with a plan to help Bonediger. John knew there was no way he could reintroduce Bonediger's old pal Tony into his life without there being a huge risk, but there was another resident of the zoo that might be able to help. Abby the Dachshund was extremely friendly with people and animals alike, and being small and harmless, seemed like the perfect companion for the lion. But John hadn't counted on what would happen within seconds of their first meeting. Abby didn't balk at the idea of entering the lion cage. A little bravery goes a long way for anyone, but perhaps one should be at least a little on their guard when walking into a lion's cage. While another zookeeper kept hold of Bonetiger, John slowly entered the enclosure with Abby on a tight leash. He'd expected the little dog to be hanging around his legs to make sure it was safe before venturing further, but that's not what happened at all. The second Abby made eye contact with the big cat, she started pulling at the leash and jumping up, eager to get over to play with her toothy new friend. John knew he had to take this slowly. With guests in the park watching, he wasn't ready for this situation. But when he looked up from the excitable dog, he jumped when he saw the lion had gotten away from the other keeper and it was walking toward Abby. Bonetiger stopped dead in front of Abby, eyes wide and wild. But Abby wasn't fazed, she just carried on exploring her curiosity, sniffing up at the wild cat that was much larger than her. The keeper that lost control of the lion lay on his back, breathing heavily as he watched the scene unfolding before him. John gulped and slowly backed out of the cage, but Bonetiger was having none of it. Abby let out a bark that Bonetiger could have effortlessly drowned out with his mighty roar, but the Jungle King didn't retaliate. The lion jumped back at the sight of the uppity little dog. To the onlookers, it seemed the lion was actually scared of Abby, but the lion leaned in to sniff the sausage dog. Then things took a turn. Abby wagged her tail in all the excitement of meeting a new friend, but everyone looking into the cage was more concerned with what the lion was going to do next. Willing to take things to the next level, John let Abby off the leash. But he didn't expect the curious little pooch to go directly for Bonetiger's stash of toys. The lion wasted no time, pouncing in to protect them. Clearly not taking the situation as seriously as John or the other terrified onlookers, Abby looked up at the lion standing between her and the new playthings she'd found and licked the lion's nose. Bonetiger just stood there, dumbfounded at the cheek of the dog. John himself was aware that Abby was clueless to the fact that some animals were more dangerous than others. Sizing Abby up, Bonetiger made his move. Bonetiger and Abby became fast friends. The pair ran and frolicked in the cage for hours after their first encounter. Bonetiger was over the moon to finally have a friend to share his life with. It was incredible to see how this tiny dog was so unafraid of a lion who, although still young, could seriously be dangerous. But apparently, that's to be expected. Apparently, Dachshunds aren't really aware of their size, so they aren't daunted when they come up against bigger animals, no matter how dangerous or hungry. Bonetiger, who was craving a new playmate, found the perfect companion in Abby. And soon it would become a pride when John introduced even more unorthodox friends for the lonely lion. Bonetiger and Abby were moved into a bigger enclosure where Abby got her own bed alongside her new best friend. Soon, 3 more Dachshunds were introduced to Bonetiger and they all got along swimmingly. They became part of his pride and he became part of their pack. They run around playing and chazzing each other and they're never apart except when John has to clean their enclosure. Every once in a while, John has to enter the enclosure to trim down the grass and get rid of weeds. The Dachshunds love to attack the weed whacker, so John is forced to take them out. Bonetiger spends the whole time pacing around the fence, crying. As soon as I'm done weeding, I let the wiener dogs back in, and he counts his dogs, makes sure they're all there, and just loves all over them, he says. But Abby's definitely the one he loves the most. I think there's a bigger bond between Abby and Bonetiger than the other 3 wiener dogs, says John. He even bites at the fleas like you see dogs do with each other. It's just crazy what they do. Now, it might be easy to call this a fluke. But it's by no means the only story of a pooch helping a big cat. Thousands of miles away, a Russian zoo scrambled to help 3 rejected tiger cubs. The workers at Madagascar Zoo in Nizhny Novgorod, Russia, thought it was going to be a day of celebration. Their very pregnant tigress, Scheherazade, went into labor, and everyone prepared to welcome the new cubs into the family. However, there was an underlying fear that follows these kinds of births. Mother tigers are one of many animals that can reject their babies right after birth. There are many reasons they might have to reduce their litter size so they can care for their cubs better in harsh environments, or they want to breed again. But there is a special reason that might be directly tied to their life in zoos. Animal stress is one of the workers' biggest fears. Zookeeper Olga Prokhorova held her breath as the little cubs came into the world, so did the rest of the team. With careful coaxing and watchful eyes, they waited to see what would happen. The tiger leaned down and sniffed. Everyone deflated as she walked away. The signs were clear. She wanted nothing to do with her new children. Olga sighed and leaned against the window. The little peeps and cries the babies made would normally be cute, but now they were just heartbreaking. It was extra sad that they would soon have to sell them. Yes, two of the brothers were spoken for by other zoos. And within a few days, the last cub was on his own. The fuzzy blankets did nothing to calm him, and the goat's milk only offered nourishment, nothing more. Olga thumped her head against a desk, praying for an idea. All of a sudden, the answer scampered through the door. The black and brown dog pawed at the window, trying to get to the crying infant. Could it work? Olga wondered. They had never tried anything like that before. The others thought she was crazy, but they were out of ideas. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? The introduction was slow and careful. On one side, the grown dog wagged her tail and jittered with excitement. The cub sat on the other, wobbling back and forth. They each leaned in, took a sniff, and the dog left a long, gooey lick over the cub's face. It didn't end there. Olga felt tears form as the maternal mutt curled around the cat, and the little one fell asleep in an instant. After that, they were inseparable. The cub was quick to walk, and in no time they were taking walks around the zoo together. Then the playing started. They would jump and skip around each other. It was an adorable mix of cat and dog play, each one acting a little like the other, but always having fun. The stress of separation melted away, and the new family was the highlight of everyone's shift each time they came in. The zookeeper felt a tiny piece of her heart break off at the idea they would have to eventually sell the cub. But, at least for now, the tiny creature would know love and safety. It would have a mother. These two are another miracle of the animal kingdom. Thank you for watching this fantastic story. Please tap one of the two videos on your screen for another amazing wonder stories.